Hello and welcome to Apigee Up Close, a webcast series. We do this webcast twice a month. Topics are based on popular demand. You can sign up to as many of these webcasts as you like. I'm Sarthak. I'm a solutions architect with Apigee. Been with Apigee for almost 7 years now. I primarily work with our enterprise customers in and helping them with their API journey. I work across different verticals from banking to insurance to pharmaceuticals to retail, and I'll be your host for this today's session. A quick overview of the agenda. So we are gonna look into how do you migrate applications to cloud using an API first strategy. We are gonna then see a quick demo on how do you do app migrations. And finally, we'll have some time for answering some live Q&As. Let's dive right in how do you accelerate your app migrations to cloud and why do you need API management to help you do that. So getting to the cloud is not easy, right? This is obviously one of the biggest topics of discussions in the IT and the software world in 2018 on how do you take your applications which are running on-prem and how do you migrate them to cloud. Cloud migration is definitely not 100% lift and shift. You have to do all sorts of different stuff. While you are doing those lift and shift and other strategies to move your applications to the cloud, you cannot disrupt your business flow. When you're moving to the cloud, it also raises a whole bunch of new security issues and concerns. Like previously you might operate inside a network and now you are going outside of a network to your cloud, and which opens up brand new security challenges, so you have to address those. And finally, this is actually a pretty big one, that all these big migrations which we are planning, this is something which we have been talking in the last just few years, right? So it is not like something which we have been doing for decades and for a long time for this scale of projects which we are undertaking. This is almost unprecedented, where we are taking multi-million-dollar, in some cases billion-dollar projects, in moving all sorts of IT assets to cloud, and in total we may have just a few years of experience in our bags on how to move to cloud, right? So definitely the cloud migration lacks a strong migration strategy. So let's look at some of the key problems which are there with the migration, right? So you are thinking, if you're thinking of moving to cloud, you're probably thinking of doing that so that you can be more agile and more flexible. You can deliver more CI/CD and you can do stuff more faster, go to market faster. But ironically, as you are doing that, just the whole process of moving to cloud is an extremely time consuming, which takes meticulous planning, which takes probably many years for your assets to move to cloud. So you want to be more agile, but the first step towards becoming more agile and more iterative and respond faster to market demands is has a very high barrier for entry, where it takes you a long time to do that basic thing of moving to cloud. So the first question we asked ourselves is, how can you be more agile, more iterative while moving to cloud, so that you can start those cloud journeys in small steps? We touched upon this, that the security is obviously always extremely important, but when you're moving to cloud, it becomes even more so, because you are going to a little bit different environment than what you are super familiar with over the last 10, 20, 30 years, right? You are moving outside of your perimeter, outside of a network, and you are rehosting those applications outside of your boundaries. So you need to rethink those securities in a little bit different way. When you're moving to the cloud, you cannot move all those applications at once, right? You can only move a few applications at once. And when you are moving them to the cloud, you are leaving a bunch of those applications behind the scenes on-prem. So those applications which are consumer facing, and they are running in the cloud, but behind the scenes they might be calling those on-prem applications or to other cloud providers and whatnot. So essentially you are creating this hybrid environment which needs to be managed, and not only it can be managed, that it can be managed better, right? So we create this hybrid environment by spending a lot of time in network level security on how to set up VPNs and VPC peerings and whatnot. Can it be done a little bit better, faster way? Because those network securities takes a lot of time to set up. We often hear from customers that just to set up that initial network security, it takes 6 months or a year. just to set up those connectivity between that on-prem and cloud. So essentially, you cannot even start your cloud project unless those connectivities are done. So the question is, can it be better? And finally, the backends are becoming more and more complex because previously you used to have just monoliths. Granted, it might have a million lines of code, but it used to be a monolith or a few monoliths, right? But now you are consuming third-party SaaS applications, you are writing microservices, you still have those monoliths, they are not going away anytime soon. And you have this whole thing with polyglots, right? Where you have different stacks and different programming languages which are used for different parts of the business logic. So you have all sorts of different capabilities and different structures over the back end, but they needs to be exposed as a uniform interface to your client, because your consuming clients, they don't really care whether you're running a monolith or a backend which is over microservices, or whether you're running a Ruby or a Spring Boot or J2E application, right? For them, it's they just care about the data, they just care about how the interfaces are. So in this extremely polyglot and diverse world, you still need to, and more importantly, you need to maintain a uniform set of APIs. And how do you do that? So as we're talking about cloud migrations, essentially it takes three key forms. So either we are talking about lift and shift, when we are taking your applications and moving them as is to cloud, which means that you are typically migrating your VMs. You are taking your VMs from on-prem and rehosting them to the cloud. This is oftentimes, it can be the lowest risk and the lowest reward situation. Then you have the lift and replatform. This is when you are trying to migrate. You want to take some advantages of cloud without changing the actual applications too much. So you are still doing a VM, but maybe as you are migrating, you were running, let's say, MySQL on-prem. Instead of when you're going to cloud, where you're going to GCE, you are using a hosted version of MySQL instead of managing the infrastructure aspect of MySQL yourself. Or it might be you are running an older version of the operating system in the VM. As you are going to the cloud, you are upgrading that version of that OS. Finally, you have the lift and modernize. So this is definitely the one which takes the most time, but this obviously has the most reward as well. So in this case, you are moving to the cloud, but as part of that, you are modernizing your applications. Most likely, you are modernizing them to use containers and things like Dockers and Kubernetes, and so that your applications are more cloud native and they can take cloud benefits like horizontal scalability or multi-region or multi-geography, high availability, and things like that, and auto-scaling and so on and so forth. So these are three main buckets on how do you think about cloud migrations. And Apigee can help, right? That's the whole premise of in some of those journeys. And Apigee can help address some of those key problems which we talked about earlier, from iterative migrations to security and things like that. So Apigee acts as an abstraction layer for your hybrid cloud. So this is where you have all sorts of on-prem systems, maybe your CRMs and inventory and HR and other systems that you're running on-prem. You might have private clouds running Cloud Foundries and Kubernetes. You might have some stuff on other clouds as well. All these things may need to go through GCP, where you are using a whole bunch of different services, from Cloud Data Store to BigQuery to Bigtable to Compute Engine to App Engine and whatnot. And then all of that data needs to be finally exposed out to your clients, to your mobile apps and web apps. Now, Apigee acts as an abstraction layer where all this data can flow through the Apigee API gateway, and Apigee can take care of just as general gateway things, right, like rate limiting, quotas and whatnot, but also can provide you rich analytics, provide you a dev portal using which you can expose those APIs to your consuming developers. You can monetize, you can protect your APIs from bots, you can operationalize the data and things like that, right? So Apigee acts as essentially the glue which holds this communication between your clients and this hybrid, diverse backend. Let's look at how Apigee helps the lift and replatform. So when you are doing a lift and replatform, let's say you have 5 different services which are running in VMs inside a monolith on-prem. Now you want to take those services and rehost some of them in GCP. You are still running them as VMs, but now you are running them in Google Compute Engine in GCE. While you are doing that, you still have a few services which are left behind on-prem, because remember we talked about how can you move iteratively, and so you will still leave some of those applications on-prem while others are running in the cloud, and you have Apigee in front of these two different sets of backends. And Apigee acts as an abstraction layer so that your clients, they don't feel the difference whether the call is coming from your on-prem or from your compute engine in GCP. And Apigee takes care of making sure that there's the right abstraction. Apigee can route the traffic dynamically for either to GCP or to on-prem, can provide you the right visibility into who is consuming which applications, and essentially help you to migrate iteratively. When we're talking of lift and modernize, Apigee can actually provide even more value, right? Because first and foremost, when you are doing lift and modernize, you are probably going to use microservices. You want to rewrite some of those applications. Maybe you had a J2EE application on-prem. You want to write that using Spring Boot and run it inside a Docker and Kubernetes cluster, and you are hosting that inside GCP, right? So as you are doing that, you might want to modernize a whole bunch of stuff from, maybe you have on-prem, you have SOAP, you want to go to JSON over REST, or you have SAML on-prem, you want to go to OAuth. So you are modernizing a whole bunch of protocols. As you go to cloud, as you are using the microservices, you need to manage those microservices, and that's where you might leverage Istio, which is a great project as part of the Kubernetes ecosystem. And if you are not familiar with Istio, I'm going to spend a few minutes on Istio later on in this presentation, and you should also head over to istio.io to learn a little bit more. Apigee will also help in this lift and modernize to bridge between those external APIs, right, which your consumers are calling, and those internal microservices, which are in turn managed by Istio. And Apigee is deeply integrated with Istio so that you have a common plane to manage those external facing APIs as well as those internal microservices. And there are a whole bunch of other things which Apigee can do from providing the right visibility, the right analytics, to manage multiple API versions and whatnot. Let's now dive a little deeper into how can Apigee actually help you to lift and modernize. So we touched upon this earlier, that Apigee acts as the abstraction layer for hybrid cloud, right? And we talked about that as you are going to hybrid cloud, you are probably using containers and microservices, and you need to manage those microservices using Istio, while you have other parts of your infrastructure which are still running VMs, or you might be doing Kubernetes and containers even on-prem. So Apigee acts as the glue which creates that uniform facade in front of your microservices and your VMs running on-prem or in cloud, so that you can move around those services and applications behind that facade without your clients ever needing to know where and how these services are moving. So let's look at quickly how the traffic flow might be, right? So you have the Apigee Enterprise Gateway, where the call comes in from an external consumer. And when I say external, I mean external to your application. So it can be another business-to-business app, it can be another service inside your data center, or it can be a mobile app, web app, or a partner, whatever it might be. So this call comes in, Apigee over here enforces things like OAuth, quota, spike arrest, caching, you can do live tracing and whatnot. This calls then in turn gets into your Kubernetes cluster. I'll not go into specific details of what Envoy and Mixer and these things are. These are different components of Istio. You can learn a little bit more on Istio.io. And we also have a lot of great content on the Apigee site on Istio as well. So when the call comes in, the call enters that specific container where you can see this service A is running in a Docker container. And there's an Envoy sidecar over here, which is taking care of collecting the microservice level telemetry. It is doing client-side load balancing. It is doing routing, because you have constantly services coming up and inside the cluster. So to route it to the right backends and things like that, right? So Istio and Apigee are closely integrated so that we can take care of all the APIs and all the services coming from your client to Apigee to downstream to your microservices. So we often get asked that, hey, how is API management similar or different to service mesh? So service mesh is, if you are not familiar with, it's a new term which you will hear a lot in relation to microservices. It essentially means how do you manage service to service communications in a microservices world. Think of this is API management for the micro small world, right? So here you will see that in that world you need to do routing to these different backends, because in this microservices world you don't have services which are running for years and months and whatnot. You have services which are running for hours and days. So as new containers are coming up and new and old containers are getting killed, it needs to get routed to those different backends. You need to enforce quota, you need to do request tracing and API key verification and JWTs and do load balancing, client-side load balancing, because you cannot put a centralized load balancer for your backend at this layer. So all of these features comes as part of Istio. Once you take those APIs, those microservices, you want to expose them over to your clients. That's where you need more higher level functions, right? You might want to transform your APIs from XML to JSON, SOAP to REST. Might want to productize them, like, hey, I have a gold product and a silver product and platinum product. Might monetize them, might create a developer portal where consuming developers, they can come and discover those services. They can look at different business analytics and enforce OAuth and things like that, right? So at a very, very high level, this set of features might look, somewhat overlapping, but actually they are not, right? On this left-hand side, the Istio features, these are very low level service to service. Think of almost like a network level feature. Whereas on the right hand side, these are more higher level, business level features, which helps you to expose those APIs to your consumers. And Apigee actually helps you to bridge the gap between those external features, external APIs, through its core API management feature, and then deeply integrating with Istio for managing the microservices. So what in turn it means for you that I've been constantly talking about this hybrid world, right? So this is how a hybrid world looks like, right? So you have VMs, which are running on-prem. You have VMs which are running on GCP. You have containers, maybe Kubernetes, which is running on-prem. You have Kubernetes running on GKE. And you have containers and apps which are running on VMs, Kubernetes, and all sorts of stuff. Now, in this hybrid world, you have all these APIs, and these APIs are then at a service level, at a micro level, they are managed by Istio. And if you want to expose those APIs, then you need to go through Apigee API management so that Apigee can take care of, the threat protection and the analytics and caching and tracing and creating dev portal and developer community and so much more. One thing I wanted to highlight here. So here, though, we have said Istio on top of this VM-based applications, but this is not necessary, right? In fact, you are going to see very often that you are going to expose these APIs directly to API management, and Istio is only helping you with the containers. The reason we have said Istio over here, because we want to let you know that Istio is not only for managing microservices, but Istio itself can actually create a hybrid, because you might be running VM-based microservices, right? Not in Kubernetes. So you can use Istio in your traditional VMs as well, but you can only have those APIs directly exposed to API management, and Istio confined to the world of Kubernetes and containers. Let's now look at how exactly does Apigee help you with this overall journey. So there are three key themes, right, which Apigee helps you with. One is the security, then visibility, then transformation, and we always have something a little extra. So in terms of security, the key thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that we spend a lot of time in network level security. The application level security is relatively old school, right? Where we either think of, hey, do you have SAML, or do you have Kerberos, do you have NTLM, do you have certificate, and that's it. That part of security needs to be rethought. So we need to think of what is the app authentication looks like, which is very often not considered. What does app authorization look like? Like which app has access to which APIs, which version, of that API, what parameters of that API response does it have access to, how do you protect from malicious bots, from SQL injection, from other kinds of injection attacks, how to protect from DOS attacks. There's you need a lot of authentication authorization capabilities, because even if you want to do OAuth, someone else might want to do JWT or OpenID Connect or SAML. So you need to cater to different backends and different client applications, and Apigee can help you with all of these. These are out-of-the-box features, along with things like auto-scaling and dedicated IPs, which tremendously helps you with that layer 7 application level security. Visibility, operational analytics, this is where you can see as you are migrating or planning to migrate, that how are the error rates varying, or how are the latencies varying, what's the throughput between that on-prem versus the microservice, to business analytics, which will actually help you decide on how to migrate or when to migrate, right? You will know which clients are using which applications, which versions of the applications, when are they using them, how is it varying by API versions, by geography, how is the usage patterns is different over time, and this helps you essentially decide when and how to migrate. These are some of the out-of-the-box reports of analytics which we provide, which helps you to see from throughput to developer adoption of APIs to traffic usage patterns and things like that. Transformation becomes extremely crucial, because as you are trying to move to cloud, you definitely want to migrate, but you also want to modernize at least some aspects of it, right? So though even if you don't want to modernize right away, at some stage you want to move away from things like, let's say, SOAP or SAML, and you want to go to more modern protocols like JSON over REST or OAuth or OpenID Connect. And Apigee has out-of-the-box capabilities and features using which you can do those transformations dynamically inside Apigee to make your applications more modern. Finally, Apigee is not only those three key things, right? Those three themes are very relevant for when you are thinking of app migrations, but Apigee is a full API management solution which has things like tracing to help you debug things. We are going to see that in a few minutes. A developer portal where you can publish your APIs and can create a developer community. You have programmability where you can write backend code using Node.js, Java, JavaScript, Python, and whatnot. And you can also write connectors. So Apigee is everything and all of these combined. Let's take a quick look at a real journey. This is where we are gonna see how application has actually moved from on-prem to cloud. We had a monolithic application for a customer which was running on-prem, and this scenario might look very familiar to most of you. You have a big monolith application with different services, from search to a CMS to a shopping cart, and all of these are running inside a data center, exposing some APIs which are then tightly coupled to web apps and mobile apps and whatnot. This is the current state. From this current state, what this particular customer decided that the first thing they need to do while undertaking this migration journey is to isolate these client applications and this backend. So these client applications are not impacted by any changes which is happening at the backend. So they inserted Apigee in. So Apigee can help you with security to visibility to version management to caching to do various transformations from those backends. So Apigee basically helped you to create that abstraction so that the front-end applications, they don't know when the backend changes. And they started to change the backend. So they moved some of those applications from on-prem to cloud. They modernized them using microservices. So these are individual services running in the cloud, which is running inside GKE, the Google Kubernetes engine, as part of Google Cloud Platform. They are using Istio to manage those service-to-service communications. And Apigee is exposing both those legacy applications and those microservices to your consuming apps. And your consuming apps are oblivious to where they are making the calls to. So the beauty of this is, as they did that, and this is the end state, right, where they have one single shopping cart application which is running on-prem, this is the end state, and they have moved everything else to the cloud. These client applications, they are totally unaware of that all these changes happened, and in the same time when these changes were happening, they were able to add brand new applications on the front-end side. So Apigee acts as an abstraction layer, taking care of different versioning and security and analytics and things like that, so that your front end team can build their applications in a better, faster, secure way while your back end is changing. And as I mentioned earlier, this is actually an end state. At the end of it, so keep in mind that at the end state, we have arrived at a hybrid world where there is some capability which is running on prem, there are other capabilities which are running on GCP, and Apigee is acting as the glue which is exposing both the sets of capabilities to those client applications in a uniform way. Let's jump into a quick demo. So let's first look at the demo scenario. So what I have is I have two different applications, both doing the same thing. This is a hotels app, which is exposing a fictitious hotels data. I have the version one of the app. So the version one of the API points to either a compute engine app, which is a VM, or to a Kubernetes app, which is a microservice. Both of these APIs are exposed via Apigee to clients. So I have two different clients. The clients are the client applications. They are identified by API keys. That's the most common way to do it inside Apigee. So I have two different API keys, and those API keys are calling Apigee, and then Apigee is looking at who is the caller, and then based on that, Apigee is routing the call to either the modern application or to the legacy application, because Azure is a scenario where data for some of the client has been moved to cloud, where for the other clients it has not yet moved to cloud. And Apigee sitting in between takes care of versioning, routing, mediation, analytics, and a whole lot of things. And you have a developer portal. This is where your developers are coming in to understand and to learn about those APIs and to get access to those APIs, and so on and so forth. So let's, with that, let me jump into the Apigee console. So this is what we call the management UI. When I log in, I have a few different menu items here, from something called spec to API proxies to products to portals. We are going to spend some time looking at API proxies. Let me actually come back to this in a minute. First, let's look at the dev portal. So this is our fictitious Hotels R Us developer portal. If you are not familiar with what a dev portal is, I would recommend go and check out developers.google.com. So that's the Google's dev portal where Google communicates or interact or reaches out to its developer community. And that's where they have all the documentations and SDKs and forums and developer registrations, and they get their keys and whatnot. So Apigee essentially provides you a similar dev portal which you can customize to your heart's content, and you can create a portal which is for either for internal developers, partners, third-party developers, whatnot. So if I go to these APIs, I can see I have a few different APIs. I have this thing called CMAP hotels, and over here I can see I have a few different hotels from few different hotels APIs, from get all hotels to hotels names and whatnot. I can try out the API calls right from here. But essentially, this is where I can explore those APIs. What is more important is if I actually go back now to the management console, and if I go to this section called API proxies, this is where I will see this proxy. I have a whole bunch of proxies for doing different things. But for this demo, I'm interested in the CMAP Hotels V2 proxy. So this is where you can see I have this /v1/hotels API, which we saw over here. You can see this v1/hotels API. And I have, this is the interesting part, I have two different backends. I either have this on-prem backend or I have this GKE backend. So I have the same front end, which is /v1/hotels, which then routes the call to two different backends depending on some logic. So if I go into my proxy definition, it is relatively simple. I have a verify API key where I'm verifying, whereas my app authentication authorization mechanism as an API key, I'm checking whether the API key with which the call is coming, whether it's valid, what API it has access to, and things like that. And then there are a few other routing things and a few other simple policies over here. I'll not go into a whole lot of details of all the policies and the flows which are set up. Rather, I'm going to quickly jump into Trace. So Trace is a live debugging tool. So this is where you can see where the API calls are coming from in real time. And this is a great way for you to debug things instead of going through your log files. So when I turn on Trace, you can see there's a whole bunch of calls coming in. It's because I have a script running, which is generating a few different calls based on few different parameters. So let's quickly look at two different calls. So in this case, you can see I have API key, which is starting with NOK, and and this API call is coming in. There's an API key. So I can step through each and every step on what's happening inside Apigee. I can see what the call is going to. So it is going to the GKE backend. But if I go to the other call, which has a different API key, I can see in this case, it is going to the on-prem backend. So essentially what Apigee is doing is, as the calls are coming in from two different API keys, Apigee is routing the call to two different backends, and this is based on an initial configuration which is done at the time of app onboarding. For some other APIs, Apigee is just throwing an error saying, hey, this API key is not authorized to access any of the backends, right? So it's a very, very simple demo that as you are moving from on-prem to cloud, you might need some clients restricted to just the on-prem version, some other clients restricted to the cloud version, and Apigee can do that seamlessly without your clients needing to know that there are two different backends, and Apigee maintains a uniform interface in the front. One other thing which I wanted to quickly show you is analytics, because that becomes really important. So let's quickly see an error code analytics. We have a lot of stuff, but we won't have time right now to go through everything. So here you can see this error code analytics where I am actually seeing what's the total error rates, success versus error rate, 4xx versus 5xx errors. So this immediately gives you an option of an ability to see how is the errors varying from APIs to APIs, how are the errors changing as you move from cloud to on-prem or on-prem to cloud or from legacy to microservice, and this helps you to immediately take those actions, and you can do it by per client or by API key, by different time durations and whatnot. There's a whole bunch of other analytics, and you can even create custom reports, but I don't think we'll have time right now to go through all of these. So let me pause there, and we'll be back in a momentarily to answer all the questions which you have asked.
All right, so looks like we have a few questions. The first question is integration with third-party IDPs for app registration. Yes, Apigee can be integrated with any third-party app, any third-party IDPs, as long as those IDPs are exposed, has an HTTP interface. So we do a lot of integrations from Okta to Ping Federate and all. As long as there is an HTTP interface, you can easily integrate Apigee. You can, and there are a whole lot of different patterns which you can learn more about in docs.apigee.com and can ask more questions on community.apigee.com. Second question, migration and sync apps keys of a third-party auth server with the apps in Apigee. Yes, again, can be done, approved, revoked. All of these can be done pretty easily. There are more details on docs.apigee.com and community.apigee.com. These are your best friends, both the docs side and the community side, where you can get a lot more details on this sort of questions. Third question, how to maintain the app keys for any apps we create. So all the apps and APIs are available over APIs. So you can call those apps, you can export all the data using the API keys and things like that, and you can save it anywhere else you want. If you are using Apigee SaaS, everything is highly available, spread across multiple regions, so there is almost zero chance of you losing those API keys. But if you want, you can use the APIs to export the data. We have a requirement to send some message push type to multiple subscribers. Can this be done at Apigee level? So the answer is yes, as long as that push type mechanism uses an API. So for example, if you use Google Cloud Platform, GCP has this capability called Cloud Pops Up. Cloud Pops Up actually exposes REST endpoints. So we have customers who use those REST endpoints through Apigee, and then Apigee will then basically it's just for an Apigee standpoint, it's just any other endpoint, right? And so the answer is yes, as long as there are REST endpoints, and you have more and more systems today which have REST endpoints from MQ to JMS systems. So yes, but the other aspect is what do you do if you don't have a REST, if you don't have a native REST endpoint? So we have recently announced this feature called hosted targets. Hosted target is think of an Apigee serverless, where you can write your custom serverless code inside Apigee to communicate to anything non-HTTP. So you can write using Node.js or Java, and you can write any piece of code inside Apigee, and which can talk to non-HTTP interfaces like MQs and JMS and whatnot, right? So you can definitely look at that. Just search for Apigee hosted targets for you to learn a little bit more. The next question is, if I enable streaming from Abhiram, can you please list which specific policy will not work? Any alternative to mediation flow even if streaming is enabled? If streaming is enabled, none of these policies will work because, let me take that back. So streaming works in two phases. So first is you get the first byte of data, which comes at the Apigee policy layer, and there every other policy will work. So there, when the first header information comes in, you can enforce your, you can enforce security or capture data for analytics and whatnot. But after the first byte, basically the whole payload does not come in through the policy layer. Rather it goes down to the HTTP layer, at the socket layer, the transport layer, right? So at that layer, where the actual payload is getting streamed, nothing will come up to the policy layer. So Apigee will have no information about the actual payload getting transported. So Apigee cannot do any mediation or caching or capture analytics or so on and so forth. So it is only the first bit of payload which you can use to do security and other things. Next question from Akhil: as part of the migration, can Apigee provide API layer capability for a system that currently does not have API? So the answer is yes, and we are trying to invest more and more over there. So that's where you will see technologies like hosted targets, where you can write a custom piece of code. So hosted targets is Apigee serverless. You can write a custom code in Node.js and other languages through which you can connect to non-HTTP endpoints which do not have an API. So you can talk to your databases and MQs and whatnot, and then you can expose that on a northbound as an API. Right, so hosted targets is relatively new. Please look up for hosted targets. I think either it's in beta or might have just one GA. So you should find some more information on our docs side as well as community site. Next question: accessing on-prem services, is it done via VPN or deploying the services in DMZ? Can you elaborate on this point, referring to the hotels example you demoed? From Ravi. So Ravi, there are two aspects to the answer, right? So in our cloud, so if you are specifically talking about the demo, what we demoed, we were using Apigee in a SaaS environment. So everything is running in Apigee SaaS, and then that's communicating to your private cloud. So there is nothing getting deployed in the DMZ. Now, Apigee can communicate back to your on-prem system using things like mutual TLS. So that's an application level security where Apigee can actually terminate TLS connections, or you can use something like Google Interconnect to connect between your on-prem private cloud and to Google Cloud. We did not set up an interconnect for this demo, but you can do that as well. You can also do IP whitelisting, where we can specify just 2 to 3 IPs, not more than that, and you can guarantee you those IPs will be there. And you can use those IPs to whitelist at your firewall, or you can do a combination of all of these. Next question from Sami: does Apigee is REST-centric? Apigee is HTTP-centric. So Apigee can do anything and everything over HTTP. That's a great question. I should have clarified this previously. So you can do anything over SOAP, REST. We have customers who are even doing things like RSS feed or an Atom feed. So anything which you can do over HTTP, HTTPS, you can do it using Apigee. Next question from Aviram: Difference between security policy and Apigee Sense. Does it cloud version usage as a bundle or come with additional cost? So Abhiram, probably we should take this question offline. You can go and learn a little bit more on apigee.com about Sense. The pricing conversation, I would keep it completely separate because it totally depends on a whole bunch of different factors, from whether it's cloud or on-prem and so on and so forth, right? So if you have follow-up questions, please ask them on the technical side. Please ask them on community.apigee.com. Even a pricing question like this can be asked on community.apigee.com, and that's a great place to get this things clarified. Next question, if this was this recorded webinar, so Jay is answering that. I'll move on to Abhiram's next question. Does increase the number of gateways or message processors will have cost impact for cloud customer? Again, Abhiram, please feel free to ask these questions on community. In general, the answer is no. If you're on a cloud, we don't charge you by number of message processors we are putting out there. So the answer should be no. But if you have any specific scenario in mind for which you are asking, please feel free to reach out to on community or reach out to the Apigee sales team who can help you with a specific use case. Next question for Naveen. Do you have support for non-HTTP protocols like MQTT, JMS, etc. out of the box? The answer is kind of. So Apigee has primarily just worked with HTTP interface, but as I previously mentioned, we are putting more and more emphasis on non-HTTP interfaces, but we are not doing it in a more traditional way. Rather, we are creating this technology, which is essentially an Apigee serverless, where you can host any piece of code inside Apigee in a whole bunch of different languages, and Apigee takes care of securing them, running them, scaling them, and so on and so forth. So this technology is called Apigee hosted targets. So please feel free to check it out. This is where you can you can deploy your client library in Node.js or Java. Client library talk to an MQTT, and using that, Apigee can talk to those non-HTTP interfaces. Keep an eye out for other interesting things which we are doing. We are actually spending quite a lot of engineering resources in this hosted targets and other relevant technologies. So please keep an eye out for subsequent announcements in this space. So Agish, is Apigee hosted on GCP, and is there any delay added to route the calls? Apigee is Apigee is a SaaS service. Let me answer it this way. Apigee is a SaaS service which will be hosted in a geography which you choose. So you can choose to go like US East, US West, Ireland, Singapore, so on and so forth. And you will see Apigee as a hosted service, which is primarily using GCP, but may not be, and that's not part of what you will get. So that's not part of something which will ever directly experience, right, where Apigee is hosted. From your standpoint, it's a SaaS service which you're subscribing to. Is there any delay to route the calls? We would expect the delay to be very minimum, because wherever your backend is, you can choose to host Apigee closest to that region. So if you're in US East, you can choose to go Apigee US East or US West, or you can go multi-region through this thing called Apigee DN, and you can deploy Apigee across multiple geographies. So the calls are routed to the nearest possible data center from wherever the caller is calling it from. Next question from Abhiram. I think XPath is supported by Apigee. Any roadmap for newer versions of XPath? Abhiram, again, these are great questions, but please ask them on community. That's the best place to get answers to these questions. All right, that's all the questions. I have a few quick polls for you guys. So as we mentioned at the beginning, this is a webinar series which we do twice a month. The next one is on June 21st. This is a continuation of the APIs of the product, which was there in the last webinar. And the next one, you are going to hear it from a real customer, Walgreens, who has been using this productization strategy for a few years, and how that impacted their overall journey. And for in-depth tutorial, join the virtual API jams. And for one-on-one sessions, please email at apigeeupclose@google.com. Thank you all for joining. For any further details, please sign up for a trial at apigee.com. Check out the docs at docs.apigee.com and ask for questions and help on community@apigee.com. Thank you all for joining this morning. Have a great day.